Hello students, welcome to our Module 9 overview dealing with cross-cultural conflict and expectations. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an overview of the concepts that we'll be addressing in reviewing the American style of conflict management, looking at some variables that come as a result of cross-cultural leadership, taking a look at some New Testament examples of cultural conflict, and then finally reviewing our checklist of assignments for this module. You may recall that Elmer addresses 5 different ways in which Americans deal with conflict. I've also introduced you to the Thomas Kilmann inventory of conflict management, and so we'll use their 5 terms just to review how conflict may be managed in American businesses. On one scale, one axis, we have uncooperative to cooperative, and on the other axis we have unassertive to assertive. And so for a person who is not very assertive and not very cooperative, their way of dealing with conflict is to avoid it. If they're more cooperative, they may accommodate to the whims and desires of another. For those who are more assertive but are not cooperative, then competing is the quadrant that they're in. If they're both assertive and cooperative, then they look for collaboration. And those who look for conflict management somewhere in the middle deal with the issue of compromise. Now, the reason why this is the American style is because all of these are looked at from an individualistic perspective, not even taking into account the collective. As we consider cross-cultural partnerships and cross-cultural teams, we have to take into account that there are cultural values that are going to make leadership and conflict management more challenging. First of all, we have to deal with the issue of high power distance versus low power distance. And if we're dealing with someone from a high power distance situation, they're going to want a definitive answer for conflict management, whereas with low power distance, we may look for a more collaborative approach to resolving a situation. As I've already mentioned in the previous slide, there's the difference between an individualistic approach and a collectivistic approach. And so what is good for the one as opposed to what is good for the many? What about the issue of indirect communication and high context versus direct communication and low context where everything is spelled out? These are issues that also can not only bring conflict, but also have to be accounted for with conflict management. What about honor-shame motivation as opposed to success-failure motivation? This is another variable in conflict management. What about acquired status, where someone may not have the qualifications for the job, but has been given the job, as opposed to others who have earned their place of status? All of these are variables for conflict, but are also variables that have to be taken into account for cross-cultural conflict management. The following is a list of some of the cultural conflicts that arise in the book of Acts. In chapter 6, we see a conflict that arises between Jewish Christians, those who are Hebrew-speaking versus those who are Greek-speaking. The fact that Greek-speaking widows were being overlooked in terms of ministry. In chapter 8, we've got Jewish Christians who are sharing the gospel with Samaritans and an African proselyte. And as a result of this, there's a question in the Jerusalem church as to whether this is appropriate. In chapter 10, we have a Jewish Christian entering the home of a God-fearing Gentile. And so Cornelius and his household come to faith in Christ, but this causes conflict. In chapters 11 through 13, we have Jewish Christians who are sharing the gospel with interested Gentiles. We see in chapter 13 that Antioch has a multi-ethnic leadership, and we see that John Mark departs shortly after the first missionary journey, perhaps because of the fact that Paul and Barnabas were reaching out to interested Gentiles and not Jews only. In Acts chapter 15, we've got the church conference, the Jerusalem Council, to determine God's plan for believing Gentiles. And we also find a conflict, not a cross-cultural conflict, but a conflict nonetheless between Paul and Barnabas. And in chapter 17, we have a Jewish Christian, Paul, who takes the gospel to Athens and shares the gospel with anybody who will listen, including philosophers at Mars Hill or the Areopagus. Our checklist of assignments for this module is rather short. First, watch Dwayne Elmer's video on the monkey serves the fish, and we'll see how serving the fish, his intention to do so, may be as culturally appropriate as some of the things that we do on mission trips. Secondly, you'll do reading, not textbook reading this time, but selections from the New Testament, which you will find under reading in Module 9. And then you will also fill out the reading guide, the Module 9 reading guide, and upload it. I hope you have a great week.